My guests today are both building leading EdTech platforms in their respective countries, aiming to democratize access to high-quality education through technology. Shahir Chowdhury is the founder and CEO of Shikho in Bangladesh, which launched in 2019. Shikho is hyper-localized for Bangladesh, focusing on visual gamified learning and exam prep, with 2.5 million registered users across all 64 districts of Bangladesh. They've raised over $8 million in funding thus far from VC funds like Learn Capital, Wavemaker Partners, Anchorless, and Sturgeon Capital. My other guest is also building with a similar vision. Hamdi Tabaa is the co-founder and CEO of Abwaab, an EdTech platform headquartered in Jordan and building for the broader MENA region. Really excited to have them here. So welcome, guys.
Thank you, Cass. Very excited to be here.
Thank you.
Excited to have you. So I'm curious about how you guys have navigated the noise in the space of within the space of content, and what are strategies that you guys have clicked with you guys in terms of converting people, into paid users. What has worked for you? And maybe Shahir, if you want to go first, and then Hamdi.
I think when we started, at least from Shikho's journey, the inflection point was when we figured out that live classes or live instruction from teachers generally was perceived to be superior to just recorded online content, right? So YouTube, you will have a lot of recorded content from many different teachers of different quality, and people are used to going and finding stuff for themselves. I think the live instruction is a bit different because number one, it's structured. And number two, you have somebody telling you exactly what to do. So at least in the Bangladeshi context, our students like to be guided as opposed to be self-guided. And I think that's a cultural thing. It really just works better when you have the teacher as the focal point and the teacher is there with you in the class. And then everything around the student, apart from the live classes and the teacher, is basically centered around that class. So we give homework, which is animated video lessons, which is quizzes. You have chapter exams. Based on those chapter exams, you get a report card. But at the center of it, you have this teacher who's telling you, this is the homework you need to do. That's what you got in your last report card. This is how you've got to do better. So that's how we've designed the system. And effectively, that's sort of the USP you have versus the free content that's out there. So at a very basic level. So it's the structuring, it's the routine, it's the guidance, it's the mentorship, and it's that live interaction with this very charismatic, experienced teacher. For us at the moment, our focus is on how do you take artificial intelligence and AI and sort of this wave of like large language modules and then integrate that into the existing learning experience so that this is something that is completely unique and you wouldn't be able to go and get that in YouTube or Facebook or anything else. So an example would be within sort of the live class that you have now, there's a chat window where you have 1:many. So you might have 3,000 kids in a classroom listening to a lecture from a teacher. At the moment, there's polling that the teacher can do. And then if you chat, sometimes the teacher will respond to you, but not all the time because you can't respond to 3,000 people. But if you had an AI sort of tutor that is referencing the national curriculum on that chat window, as those students were asking questions, they would get instantaneous answers, not from the teacher, but from effectively the artificial intelligence. So that's just one use case we're building. But I think, over time, as we've sort of grown this, people who are using the platform genuinely understand that there's a lot more value. Now, this is the final point. The final point is, how do you make them understand that there's value? Because if you haven't used it and paid for it, you don't get the full experience. And that's the biggest challenge still.
I can tell you that the noise started before we were even founded. When I just was having conversations with people saying that I want to start something in the EdTech space, the first question that pops up, how are you going to monetize? YouTube's for free. And at the time, like ChatGPT didn't properly exist at masses. YouTube's for free. Why? How are you going to monetize it? So going into Abwaab, the first thing that I had in mind, or one of the first things I wanted to prove, is being able to sell the product that we're building. So if you look at the way we approached it, I think it came in multiple stages, obviously also as a byproduct of continuous iteration. But the first thing we did was just try to monetize the product. Sell for any amount, prove to yourself that people are willing to pay for your service. So very, very early on into our journey, when we were just literally barely like just hosting video lessons, not much features were built besides like learn at your own pace videos, we started to sell for like a few dollars a year just to be able to prove to ourselves that people are willing to pay. Once that barrier has been broken, we're like, okay, now how do we create higher value services where we are able to charge something that is commercially viable and also gives enough value to students? And from here, like when you think of value to students, it kind of like Shahir already tapped on these things: attending live sessions, getting follow-ups, receiving a guided learning experience, getting someone to handhold you and hold you accountable for the work that you're doing. Because let's face it, 14, 15, 16 or like 18-year-olds are not, they don't wake up excited on like, how am I going to study today? They think about like video games, going out, playing with their friends, spending time on TikTok and social media and things like that. So we realized that we needed to introduce this element of accountability. In reality, what's real value to students today and parents? The core of it is, I need to study to pass or score a high grade. And it saddens me a bit that this is the case, because obviously my personal mission is much bigger than that. I would like to disrupt education in a way where, not just like dropping the word disruption, but really think of how do we educate the upcoming generation to be like more productive human beings, to contribute to like the economy, society, humanity, the world and things. And you can argue that studying to pass for a test is not necessarily the best way to create a productive human being. So you start thinking of things that give value, that lead to this ultimate end goal. And then over time, I think you can pursue dreams of unleashing human potential, as we say it at Abwaab.
Yeah, changing the generations, right?
Correct.
Can you share more about what led you to invest in EdTech and specifically Shikho in 2021 when you did? And how have you seen the sector evolve since then? And how do you think Shikho continues to leverage the ratio that I mentioned to its advantage?
Great to be here. Shikho is actually one of our earlier investments, and it's been great working with the company. Just for context, we're a New York-based fund. Our LPs are primarily American and European. I think that context is important because our investors are looking for macro exposure to a country that is one of the fastest growing in the world, but doesn't have liquid assets. For example, easily accessible equities at the stock exchange globally, et cetera. So again, when it comes down to it, it's macro exposure. And education in Bangladesh, because of some of the points you mentioned, is actually a great proxy for consumer spend and general economic growth. Part of what made us believe in Shikho is, first, they were tech focused in how they were going to scale, versus tech being an after fact where they already had something going. From day one, they had a long-term vision. Second, we felt that Shahir and the company had the ability over a long term to actually provide education-related services for not just test prep, but going from grade 6 to the day somebody retires, thereby having the opportunity to become the de facto education company in the whole country. Since we invested, I think there's one thing that's really stood out for me. It's arguably the most important thing right now, that the country better prepares its students and young professionals for the future. And that's not just practical education, it's also using data to understand what opportunities are out there. We have a very heavy private and public university system, but often I see that the curriculum that's being taught is somewhat outdated. And that is something that Shikho, with its vast database, can actually remedy on the fly. And I think what's really exciting about that, especially over the last 9 months as the government has evolved, is I think both the government and the development sector, which has historically not engaged very actively with the private sector, is now talking to companies like Shikho to see how they can better augment and leverage what Shikho has done over the last few years.
Great. And for Nafez, as I mentioned earlier, you're not an investor in Abwaab, but you know the founders well, and you're widely respected as a thought leader on EdTech in the MENA region. In 2021, you made the case for why MENA's demographics are ripe for EdTech companies to break out, calling the region the EdTech sleeping giant. Much has happened in the last 4 years with players like Abwaab, Noon Academy, a few others raising significant rounds of funding in the region. And I'm curious from you, how far do you think the region has come in terms of the EdTech sector? And how do you see Abwaab as part of that growth?
I think Abwaab has come a long way, and I think Abwaab has been quite significant for the sector. I mean, Hamdi, Sabri, and the team, and like they're sort of incredible operators. They bring a lot of credibility. And although maybe sort of Noon and Klacera are, two other EdTechs that have raised significant rounds, Abwaab, in my mind, is probably the first or the largest round outside of Saudi Arabia. So that really signaled to a lot of founders in the region that this is a serious space, that this is a space that could, raise a lot of money. And I think, Hamdi and the team have done a kind of great job in sort of proving that, expanding to new markets. When I look at the market as a whole, we kind of wrote the piece in sort of 2021, Mujtaba at GSV and we talked about sort of three, I guess, specific challenges like for the region seeing it growth. The first one was sort of fragmentation. I think that is still there. And I mean, there's still a fragmented market. I think there's certainly a bit of hype, but with a lot of sort of the AI, LLM content generation, you can actually now overcome that fragmentation pretty quickly and much faster. And you can localize across sort of countries, sort of if policymakers collaborate. The other two challenges that we talked about were online payments and exit. And I think there's been a lot of sort of improvement there. I think when in 2021, something like 60% of people preferred cash on delivery for anything online, which actually made it challenging. And then Hamdi and the team were initially very innovative in how to deal with that. Now it's down to sort of 40% on average, and in some countries down to 10%, saying that 90% of people are happy to pay online. And exits has also been, I'd say both exits and M&A have come a long way. So there are two recent exits, Anara in Saudi was acquired by PwC, Little Thinking Minds was acquired by sort of Seesaw in the US. Bames, which is again another sort of interesting Kuwaiti tutoring prep company, acquired Orcas in Egypt. So there's been a lot of interesting liquidity around sort of that exits that got investors a bit more confident about the space.
You were part of Learn Capital came into the round that you were in, other outside investors came in, but how has, with cautionary tales like Baiju's, the slowdown of EdTech funding overall globally, right? How has that influenced how you talk and support companies like yours, like Shikho, and what do you think investors should focus on when they look at this model?
In a funny way, what's been great is the market has not been flooded by easy capital, and that has forced companies to become much more diligent in how they approach their product market fit, the unit economics, their fundraising pipelines, etc. I will say, after Baiju's and some of the other companies, there were short-term hiccups. I think we actually did the deal with Learn the day the Chinese came out with their new move on the nonprofit side. So it was a very interesting time to make that decision. But I think the long-term macro story for Bangladesh remains very strong, arguably one of the best in the world right now in terms of risk and reward. And so I think in step with the general venture slowdown that we saw, Shahir and the company have really fine-tuned their product market fit to increase their capital efficiency. And I think that's only made them a lot more attractive for investors who may be slightly more conservative, but also de-risks a country like Bangladesh in their minds. And I think also gives Shahir the opportunity to be more deliberate in choosing the investors he wants to work with, which I think is actually a luxury for funds or for companies that have raised perhaps a little too much. I think in general, for global investors, I continue to urge them to look at Bangladesh as perhaps one of the last great markets. And when I say that, I think I often say Egypt, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nigeria might be four of the last markets of a certain size with a certain demographic that are still underfunded. And right now, Shikho is a very, very good way to, again, get proxy into this economy. It's not just an education company, because education is so embedded in the culture.
Both Abwaab and Shikho did not exist. They were both born in 2019 before all of this happened, right? So I think things are moving really, really fast right now, and it's going to be really exciting to see how they both manage it, how they navigate it. So thank you both so much for being here today and for being part of this segment, because I think it provided a lot of really interesting, nuanced insights to the whole conversation. Thanks, guys.